Stepdad kicks me out of his house because his daughter is pregnant, and because his daughter was pregnant, he threw me, his own son, out of the house. But I got one over on the cheaters, kicked them out, and got all the money. 20 years ago, my mom caught my doctor, Fran, having sex with his secretary. That was after being suspicious for several months. She banged on the office door and demanded that he come out and face her like a man. He broke up with my mom over the phone a couple of days later. And ever since that day, I've lived with a bias against men. According to my mother, all guys are as bad as her ex-husband. They'd do the wrong thing in a heartbeat as long as they think they could get away with it. All that time, the old man was just playing the part of a good dad and husband to get what he wanted, which was mostly the sex provided to him by my mother. But after getting that, he switched his attention over to someone else, just like how a dog gets new toys and forgets to play with the old ones. At this point, she has contributed significantly to my dislike of men. And based on everything I've heard about their behavior, it's no surprise I feel like I do. But there's a little part of me that knows it's not right, but since I've had no real meaningful relationships with a guy in the past, it's kind of difficult to be certain about the subject. That's why I have the feeling that I might meet someone who could change my mind. Anyway, I think me and my stepdad had a pretty decent relationship up until the point I made it clear that I wanted to become a physics professor. He was a pretty wealthy guy, and his goal for me was always to become an attorney and work at his firm. Just a couple of days after my mom got together with him, he asked me about my future plans, and I told him that I wanted to teach things and learn as much as possible. Instead of laughing at me the way that adults normally would have, he actually said that he was proud of me, and that really meant a lot to me. So, for years, I saw him as a father figure. Unfortunately, all that fell apart during an argument when I told him I wasn't going to study law and would rather teach physics at a local community college, since I just didn't feel like amassing a ton of money only to be unhappy with myself in the future. He was really upset about it, and I expected that. But he also said a few things which I thought weren't in line with what he'd taught me over the years before that. He told me that there was no virtue in being middle class or poor, and it was my responsibility to take over his firm when it was my time to do so. I got into a huge argument about this with him, since I can't understand how earning more money makes someone happier. And I didn't try to make the point that money doesn't matter or anything, but what he was saying was that I would be happier in the career he chose for me than the one I wanted to be in. Anyway, when he finally realized that nothing he said was enough to convince me to change my mind, he just gave up and went out drinking. For almost 3 days after that, my mom was worried sick about him. I was pretty worried as well, particularly that I didn't tell her what we'd argued about. That was a big mistake. I felt terrible about it until my mom finally got in touch with him, and he was rushed to the hospital since he'd had so much to drink that it basically turned his insides to soup. Once my mom and I had visited and made sure that he was going to recover, we were both relieved, and the argument that we'd had just a few days after that kind of got lost in the whole thing. Anyway, about a week ago, he and my mom told me that they wanted to talk. For a couple of hours, I avoided sitting down with them because I kind of knew that a discussion was about the career path I'd chosen, and I made one last attempt to change it. If I'm being honest, I would just say that I was being a coward and that I was avoiding it because I didn't want to deal with it at that time. Eventually, my bad luck led me to sit down with them in the living room. Almost immediately, they told me that his daughter was moving in with them to go to school in a month once she applied to get into the local university. The reason they were telling me was that they wanted to be sure that I'd left the house before that because my mom was pregnant with the second daughter. So once his child moved in and his second daughter was born, the house was going to get way too crowded, so I had to find a different place to stay within a month. I was so shocked that I didn't say anything, and the first 15 minutes were completely silent. My mom told me that she was sorry that things had turned out that way, but she honestly kind of coaxed me into leaving when I turned 24. Because it was way too much for them to have so many people living in one house. I wanted to call them out on the lie immediately. Unfortunately, I didn't do so I had to spend the next 3 days feeling really, really terrible about myself and life in general. By the end of the day, they just lied to me so they didn't have to deal with the fact that they didn't actually want me living in the same house as my stepsister. I could only imagine what would happen if I was dating any girl and things got serious. I was in a pretty bad mood those 3 days since every time my stepdad would try to make conversation, all I could think about was the fact that they just wanted me to leave. Perhaps if the community college near them hadn't agreed to immediately hire me, he wouldn't have waited even a day before throwing me out. As a matter of fact, in those 3 days in the span of 1.5 days, I completed all the paperwork and got the phone number so I could call the people in charge of the college. They didn't have to bother with that themselves. The time came to tell them, and I was super excited. Now that he'd made his point, which was to guilt me into feeling bad, I was sure that when I told them that I was moving out in a couple of weeks, he would change his mind and tell me that I could stay. But things didn't go the way I thought. He was absolutely elated that I found a place for myself. He told me that he was very happy and that he could finally breathe a sigh of relief, and my mom just agreed with him. I was so badly hurt that I actually stormed out of the living room. He called out to me, but I didn't respond. Generally, I like to act and then think, but this time I sat down and thought about whether or not I was going to leave the house. I came up with the perfect plan to punish both my mom and my stepdad for pretending to be good parents all those years. The following morning, I told him that I was still thinking about everything and that I hadn't yet found a place, but I was positive that I absolutely didn't want to leave the house for another 12 to 13 days. He got really mad and started saying things like, how would a college teacher even be able to pay the bills? And how was I being incredibly stupid after he already told me that he was relieved that I was going to go? Once the clock struck 12, signifying that it was going to be the 13th day until his child moved into the house, I told him that I would be going out to meet a couple of my college friends to celebrate having found a way to pay for my house all by myself. He got really mad about me being unable to read the room properly and stormed out of the house. I just stuck my middle finger up at him, and he gave me a crazy amount of money and told me not to be in the house by the time that he came back home in the evening. After a couple of hours or so of me chilling in my bedroom playing video games, my mom knocked on the door and asked how I was doing. I told her I was just enjoying my favorite hobby as usual and tried my best not to sound like I was laughing. She asked me how my house hunting had been going on and told me that she was sorry that she said some pretty rude things about it that made me storm out of the living room the other day. Unfortunately, she told me the moment I said that I'd been living things, I just looked at her completely shocked, and she must have known what was coming. I was super mad at her, and I was also kind of upset. I thought that my stepdad being a guy was impossible for him to be a decent parent. After he left her about a couple of hours ago, then I started up about my college and how I thought that I would be seriously disrespecting that conversation at home. She considered making me piss. She was so desperate that she found a safe sign of just some money, but as a matter of fact, my life as all of those years had been an act as well. And the man that sold me on the idea that I should become a teacher when I was just a 6-year-old, as soon as I told him that I wanted to be a physics instructor at a community college, those students, in his estimation, do you still feel like attacking me as well? As if he was training me to take over for him one day, because that's the right thing to do. Not that I had plans on doing that or even knew anything about law, so I started arguing with her. And it took a while before she admitted that what I was saying was correct. I don't know if any of the good things that happened to me as I was growing up were actually honest, sincere acts of love and support from her and my stepdad, if it were all just a part of a ploy to make sure that I would want to stay with them. Part 1, Stepdad. I must admit when I said my head, I was over all of that in about 10 to 15 minutes, but I kept arguing with her for another couple of hours after that. I told her that I didn't have anything to say anymore, and I left the house. Nobody has heard from me since, but it's been over 2 weeks since I left. All of the money that they had saved up, which was nearly $100,000, so all of that money is mine right now. I don't want to fight with myself anymore. I told the guy who rents out the houses that maybe in 1 month or 2 months, so that maybe in 1 or 2 months, I will disappear. The guy thought that I was nuts, but after I explained myself, he kind of breathed a sigh of relief and told me that I negotiated quite effectively, better than he thought I would at any rate. Anyway, over the past week, my mom has called me at least 10 times telling me that she wants to make things right. The first couple of times I told her that as far as I'm concerned, she's not really my mother, and if somebody asks, I'm going to tell everyone that I don't have any family. I don't want my friends to tell you the truth. I was barely 2 years old the last time I used to be able to think on my own. They are the only people I know, and I hate feeling alone. I was really tempted to go back home, but I can't shake off the feeling that she's only continuing to speak with me because they need the money that I stole from them. Now, my friends have told me that I was a terrible person for doing that, but maybe I say that I did something wrong, even though she tries to make amends with me. I'm going to tell them that she needs to shell out the cost of my housing until I'm 26 to make up for everything wrong that she's ever done to me. I don't really need their help, but I wish I could trust my own thoughts. For nearly a week, I've been thinking about going back. Anyway, do you people think that, given what they did to me, stealing that money from them was justified, was the right thing to do? My best friend has blocked me, and if my other friends knew what I actually did, they would do the same as well. I mean, Lucia, you feed the mistake in what I did to everyone, or at the very least, if you think that what I did was wrong, tell me what punishment I have to undergo so that I can once again feel okay with being alive.